All right, so I'm going to talk about leadership and trust, and also leadership and managers, and also some of the theories that go into that, and then some of the traits that possibly make a good leader. So to start off, um, obviously as a leader, it's important to be trusted because you have the power to influence employees to work. And some examples of that could be CEOs like, say, Steve Jobs or Warren Buffett. But it's important for those people to be trusted because even though they are the chief executive officer, they're still at the mercy of their board of directors. And as in Steve Jobs' case, they can make the decision to fire them if needed. So like there's two old questions with leadership. Are leaders born or made? And then can leadership skills be developed? And the answer is both. People are definitely born with different leadership skills right off the bat. But at the same time, they can be developed through work and education. And a lot of companies are taking steps to improve some of that education and help people become better leaders and managers. The term manager and leader tends to flip interchangeably. However, they're different. Leading is one of the four management functions. So planning, organizing, leading, and controlling. And a manager gives position power and their role is a little bit broader in the big scope of things. So there are definitely leaders that can be viewed as better managers. In the Apple case, Steve Jobs was viewed as a great leader, but Tim Cook was viewed as a better manager, and they fulfilled their roles very well. That's why that company succeeded. The four major classifications of leadership theory. The first is trait theory, and that attempts to determine a list of distinctive characteristics that account for leadership effectiveness. There's behavioral leadership theories, and that attempts to determine distinctive styles used by effective leaders. There's situational leadership theories, and that attempts to determine the appropriate leadership styles for particular situations using models. And then there's contemporary leadership, and that attempts to determine how effective leaders interact with and inspire and support followers. So those are your four main theories. Some of those theories get a little more specific as you dive deeper into them. Like for instance, with contemporary leadership, you might have like a visionary leader, someone with an image or a goal, and then or you could have like some maybe like that is more charismatic and maybe lacks the vision but understands how to influence people. And then some of the traits that make a good leader aren't maybe what you would suspect. A lot of times, people that tend to be highly intelligent or maybe on the narcissist end are it's likely that they would like to be a leader, but at the same time, you can look at successful leaders and understand maybe why they are successful. For instance, Elon Musk from SpaceX and Tesla, he's a little bit more introverted and a little bit more on like that science. I wouldn't want to say geeky, but he's on that kind of end. Like he's not very outspoken, but at the same time, his intelligence is respected, and he has been able to gain a lot of trust from corporations to lend him money to keep up with his businesses. So that's something that is worth looking at. There's a couple studies that have tried to pinpoint what traits make a good leader. The I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right, but the Giselli study um, was one of the most widely publicized trait studies. It studied more than 300 managers from 90 different businesses in the United States, and Edwin Giselli, however you say it, he concluded that certain traits are important to effective leadership, though not all of them are necessary. Um, they they range from the first one being the most important to the last one being the least important. They go supervisory ability, need for occupational achievement, intelligence, decisiveness, self-assurance, and initiative. And yeah, so that's traits in leadership and managers.
So the early research on behavioral leadership, or just leaderships, was a study of leaders' behaviors instead of their traits. So this is obviously, theory X, theory Y, and so like stuff like that, and focused on behavior. So the early leadership was broken down into kind of these three categories of autocratic, democratic, and laissez-faire. And basically, it was just based on the leadership, or based on the behaviors that the leaders did. And then we go into two-dimensional leadership styles, which basically there's two dimensions to them, as you can tell, and one is structuring and consideration, and the other is job-centered and employee-centered. These are basically revolved around the same concepts of how much a leader gets the job done or focuses on that, and then how they build a relationship with the employees. The difference between structuring and consideration styles versus job-centered and employee-centered styles is that structuring and consideration was a Ohio State study, and that was separate. So it basically looked at how the job was done, and also how leaders develop relationships with others. The job-centered and employee-centered was a University of Michigan study, and that kind of gave it a spectrum based on how focused on the job you are versus the people. So going off this, there's a leadership grid, and it's if you read the book, they have a nice little graphic about it. But basically, the leadership grid rates how focused you are on the product and production versus the people. And so there is 5 different things that they, different styles that they identified with this leadership grid, which was developed by Robert Blake and James Mountain, and then Ann Adams McCancy. So the first one is impoverished. This is a leader that doesn't care really about either, doesn't set a high priority of production or the people. Then you have authority compliance, which is really high in production but very low on the people. So obviously that could probably be a little more authoritarian. You have the country club, which is low production and high focus on the people, which, a leader that just kind of wants to be friends with everyone and doesn't really want to focus on the work and producing a lot. Then you have middle of the road, which is about a 5 and a 5, so you kind of are halfway invested in both. And then you have team management, which is the scales of 1 through 9, so the full 9 of production and the people. And so this is the optimal one that the developers found that is the most appropriate style to use, of high priority on production, high priority of the people. But then we get into situational leadership, and I'll do the contingency model, and Steve will finish them up. But basically, the situational leadership is kind of when we realize, or the theorists realize, that there's not one leadership style for every situation. and so they basically just tested to see if it's appropriate for the situation, or if you have to change your leadership style. And so this contingency leadership model focuses on changing the situation instead of the style. The guy that developed it, Fred E. Fiedler, basically said that leaders can't change their style, and so the situation has to change. So coming up with a test, basically you have to figure out if you're task or relationship oriented, if the situation is task or relationship oriented, and then if it matches the situation. So the 3 questions you ask for this are: is the relationship between you and your followers good or poor? Is the task structured or unstructured, so repetitive or non-repetitive? And do you have position power? So based on all those of leadership style, you can tell about if it matches the situation or not. And so the thing with this is, if it doesn't match, then what's his name? Fiedler advocates that you change the situation, and a lot of people disagree with that, saying that you have to change the style. I personally disagree with that because I think that it's much easier to change a person's leadership style than it is to change the entire situation around them. So with that, I'll turn it over to Steve.
So throughout this chapter, we learned about 2 men who developed a model of leadership that focuses on who makes the decisions. These 2 men were Robert Tannenbaum and Warren Schmidt. They use these models to determine which type of style is the best given a certain situation. There are 3 variables that help determine which style is the best. They include the leader's preferred style, the follower's preferred style for the leader, and the situation. There are 4 main styles that were given in the book. Directive is the leader provides a high structure. This type of leadership is appropriate when subordinates want an authoritarian leadership. The next is supportive. This type of leadership is appropriate when authoritarian leadership is not desired. This type of leadership is also appropriate when the task is simple. Next is participative. The leader considers employee input when making decisions. This type of leadership is appropriate when subordinates want to be involved in the decision-making process. And the last is achievement-oriented. The leader will set difficult but attainable goals, and the leader expects the subordinates to perform at the highest level possible. There are a few models that they viewed over in the book as well. The first is the path goal model. It's used to determine employee objectives and to clarify how to achieve them. This model focuses on how leaders can influence employees' perceptions and of their goals and the paths that they follow in order to obtain those goals. Next is a situational leadership model. It's used to select one of the 4 leadership styles that match the employee's maturity level in a given situation. So maturity refers to the level of employee development or readiness to do a certain task or job. If maturity is low, you should use a telling style, which is giving the employees explicit directions on how to do a task. If maturity level is moderate, you should use a selling style, which is explaining things in order to gain a higher understanding. If employee maturity is high, then you should use a participating style, which allows them to be a part of the decision-making process. And lastly, if employee maturity is phenomenal, then you use a delegating style, which is giving employees responsibility for decisions and their implementation.
So another part of the chapter focused on contemporary leadership theories, and this is pretty much how leaders attempt to determine how they want to interact or inspire or support their followers. So it is really important for leaders nowadays to build relationships to create a really good sense of a work environment. So for the first type of theory, we have the leader-member exchange theory. This pretty much is where the leaders kind of create an in-group and out-group, and pretty much having the in-group people have more benefits versus the out-group. And I'm sure a lot of you guys have experienced this before, and you pretty much have to get on the good side of the leader to reap all the benefits. Next one is the visionary leader. They are often associated with top management. They create an image for the future always setting goals and just thinking ahead. An example of a great visionary leader, Steve Jobs. And charismatic leaders, on the other hand, they inspire loyalty, enthusiasm, and high level of performance. This also helps really create relationships with followers by inspiring loyalty, enthusiasm, and high levels of performance, obviously. And a lot of these theories are really similar in sort of ways. So we're going to keep going on with these. Transformational leaders actually are associated with the lower levels of management, and they bring about continuous learning, motivation, and change. They pretty much motivate their own followers to transcend upon their self-interest for the good of the organization and or group. Next one are the transactional leaders. Their leadership is based on social exchange, so they're pretty much more direct and forward about what they want and what they do not want. And this kind of pretty much promotes stability. They're structural, and they're just task orientated, and they're normally passive. So this kind of helps to keep everybody grounded, to make sure what they need to do and what not to do. Servant leaders, on the other hand, they focus on helping others by placing the needs ahead of their own self-interest. So this kind of creates more of loyalty and like a sympathetic environment, in which helps build more relationships and also have their followers 100% engaged more often than not. Authentic leaders develop open, honest, trusting relationships. The relationship is the big old idea with all these leadership styles. And they're kind of more about learning by example, or leading by example. And leaders like these are normally open-minded. And the problem with this is acting authentic. With acting authentic, it's hard to do that all the time. You can't please everybody. So knowing these types of leaderships as a leader or aspiring manager can help them understand what's the best way to engage their followers, to make sure that they like you, and to make sure that they create such a loyalty base within the group. Thank you.
All right, so now we're just going to do a little self-assessment, a little discussion about some of the things we learned in the chapter. So for this self-assessment, we're just going to kind of go through the 10 things and say like what we each would describe ourselves as either usually, frequently, occasionally, or seldomly doing. So number one, I would set the objectives for my department alone rather than include employees' input. I would say occasionally.
Yeah, I would definitely say occasionally.
I would be the same occasionally.
Same here, depending on the situation. Yep.
Two, I would allow employees to develop their own plans rather than develop them myself. I would say frequently.
I would say occasionally.
I would go with occasionally, just based on previously stated like maturity levels. If you think that they can handle that, then why not let them?
I'd go frequently because people need to self-motivate themselves into doing what's best for them, for the company as well.
All right, three, I would delegate several tasks I enjoy doing to employees rather than doing them myself. I don't know, I would say occasionally because I kind of like doing things by myself, but and I think I am good at, but I think that's definitely something I need to work on. But now I'd say occasionally.
I would say seldom. Like if there are a few things as a leader that I enjoy doing and kind of keep me grounded, I think I would like to keep doing them.
I would just say occasionally.
Same with occasionally.
Four, I would allow employees to make decisions to solve I would allow employees to make decisions to solve problems rather than make them myself. Again, I'd go with occasionally. I think it's case by case kind of situational leadership, but yeah, occasionally.
Yeah, I would say frequently, depending on the types of workers I think I have. If I think they're mature and capable, I think I would have no problem letting them do that.
Yeah, I would say occasionally. It depends on the situation, but I definitely think that they should have some type of input on some of the decisions that go on.
Yeah, I would say frequently. I mean, we're all adults, and if I'm hiring people, I expect them to be mature people. So, yeah.
I think you skipped ahead to number 5.
Oh, I did.
But I would recruit and select new employees alone rather than use employees'
I
input.
kind of went into it, yeah.
Well, yes, I would say usually because I think it's important that bringing new people in, you got to get along, and so using everyone's input is important.
Yeah, I would usually ask for input because it's important. I mean, if they're gonna come into the workplace with people that have been there for a long time, it's important that they're accepted.
Yeah, I agree with both of them. I'm just gonna say usually.
Yeah, usually as well. I mean, like Haig said, they're coming into the workplace, so they got to be able to interact and work with others that's already there.
All right, 6, I would orient and train new employees myself rather than have employees do it. I would say frequently because, there's a few trusted people, but I would like to kind of show them the ropes first.
I would say occasionally, but part of that would be done by me, and then I would say a lot of the majority of the training would probably come from employees because they're closest to the culture of the workplace, and I would as a leader, I would probably be a little separated from that.
Good
Yeah,
point.
I would say occasionally I'd probably split it half and half, the leader and then also the employees.
Definitely the half and half idea would work first. Great, actually, yeah.
All right, 7, I would tell employees only what they need to know rather than give them access to anything they want to know. I would say that's kind of a weirdly worded question, but I guess I would go with occasionally because, I mean, some stuff is, before there's a lot of detail, you don't want to, tell everyone about it.
Yeah, I would say seldom because I mean, as a leader, I mean, as a leader to an employee, they are on a need-to-know basis with you, and they don't have to know everything, and it's not their right to get everything they want. So.
Yeah, I'd probably say seldom too. They don't need to know every single detail of everything that's going on. So if it's something confidential, I guess they don't need to know.
I'd go to occasional. I mean, there's times when I would believe that my employees need to know extra things just in case for the future.
All right, 8, I would spend time praising and recognizing employees' work efforts rather than just giving criticism. I would say frequently. I mean, there's definitely a point to constructive feedback as we've learned from reading the stuff, but yeah, you have to also give positive reinforcement.
Yeah, I would say usually. I think it's just as important to give people praise when they deserve it as it is to criticize them because it's probably hard to just take criticism all the time when you think you do something good, don't even receive any feedback.
I would probably say frequently. I think employees should have a high enough level of maturity to be able to take constructive criticism and not take it to heart, but try and do something in order to improve with that task or their efforts.
I would say frequently it's good to give good praise, but at the same time, you need to give that criticism. So I'd always think about whenever I'm giving praise or giving criticism that I do both at the same time, just to make sure that the employees feel good about themselves.
All right, 9, I would set several controls for employees to ensure that objectives are met rather than allow employees to set their own controls. I would say frequently. I think it's good to give guidelines to people to make sure they do the right things and doing what's best and maximize their potential.
I would say occasionally. I think at the beginning, I would maybe have a few more rules, and as things went on, if they went well, I would allow employees a little more freedom to kind of chart their own path, I guess.
So kind of case by case with employee.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd probably go with occasionally. I'd probably like to set some goals, but I think it's great to have internal goals for yourself that gives you a higher self-motivation in order to complete those tasks.
Yeah, I'd say occasional as well. I mean, there's going to be a lot of change during the course of the year and all that stuff, so you just got to be ready to adapt. So, yeah.
All right, finally, number 10, I would frequently observe my employees to ensure that they are working, meeting deadlines rather than leave them alone. I would say frequently. I think it's important to just kind of be involved. I mean, you don't want to just, I don't know, I feel like if you're not monitoring people, not that they're going to mess around and stuff, but that you're going to be kind of more detached from what they're doing. So
I'd say occasionally. I would like to be around because I want to be kind of on the ground with what's going on. But at the same time, it's probably hard to work with someone over your shoulder all the time.
Yeah.
So I would keep it at a minimum.
Yeah, I agree with both of them. I'd probably go with occasionally. I would like to make sure that they are doing their work, but I wouldn't want to be like constantly over their shoulder, pestering them, kind of making sure they're doing their work. I'd rather them just take it in on their own and be able to complete the work without me constantly, coming after them.
Yeah, I'd say occasionally as well. I mean, just being able to monitor, but not in kind of like a strict authoritative way. Just to make sure that all my employees are doing well and having a good time.
All right, so those are our 10 questions. We didn't really add them up, but which theory, X or theory Y, do you think you're closer to? I think, based off this, I think we all definitely gave more balanced answers, but I think I kind of shifted toward maybe theory X a little bit, which surprised me, but yeah.
Yeah, I think I probably shifted towards the participative end a little bit. Theory
Theory Y.
Yeah. That's about right. That's about what I expected.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm the same. Probably theory Y. I've always been kind of one to like the participative theory more, just because I think it's just a better workplace if you can have your employees participate more.
Yeah.
With the leader.
I've always been more of a theory Y guy, so I'm not surprised that I lean towards theory Y.
All right, cool.